Mr. Filippo Grandi, High Commissioner for Refugees, welcome to Al-Arabiya, sir.
Thank you very much.
On Monday morning, you held the high-level global compact on refugees and strengthening the resilience of refugees and the communities that they are hosting them. What can you tell our viewers about this compact?
You know, people, when they hear about compact, the United Nations, they always think of something a little bit strange, distant, abstract, that doesn't have any impact on the reality. I think this compact has the potential to be really a game changer in the manner in which we in the world deal with refugee crisis, especially big refugee crisis or long refugee crisis. Because the compact is a kind of new model, a new way of supporting refugees and supporting the states that host them. You know that only 10 countries host 2/3 of all the refugees in the world. So these are really the countries that we should help most, those countries and the communities. So the compact wants to do that.
How are you going to help them?
First of all, I think the most important, the compact is not only about humanitarian work. We often think refugees, they need humanitarian assistance. For sure, they need medicine, they need food, they need blankets, shelter. But what about education? What about employment? And what about the host communities? Often very poor host communities that host them.
Yes.
So these are all big gaps that we have had in the past. And the compact wants to mobilize resources, new actors, new organization, private sector, financial institutions to help with this big new effort to help refugees.
And did you have a big response?
Yeah, I think so. You know, the compact was established by the General Assembly here in New York exactly 2 years ago. So they told UNHCR, you work with states and you prepare a compact and you present it back in 2018. So we're still working on it. It's supposed to be adopted in December. But this was a big opportunity on Monday to tell states continue to support us. And 25, 30 states took the floor with very strong expressions of support. I'm very satisfied.
Do you think the compact for the global compact for refugees will make the world at large more caring for these refugees?
I don't know. I hope so. A lot of the problems of refugees are caused by bad management of these refugee situations. The problems are not the refugees themselves. The problem is how the states deal with this matter. So if the compact allows them to deal with in a better way, I think the perception that we will have at large of the refugee crisis will be less negative. But of course, it means many things. It means that states have to behave responsible. It means that politicians should not stigmatize refugees, migrants, foreigners, because this can bring a lot of votes in elections, but it creates a situation that can go out of hand, even for politicians.
How will the compact deal with the mass influx of refugees like what happened with the Syrians?
Yeah, you know, we learned a lot of lessons in the Syrians. My predecessor as High Commissioner, who's now the UN Secretary General, he really was the first one to say we need to mobilize different resources, that are put into education, infrastructure, you know, help these communities resist for a long time with the presence of refugees and, you know, help find solutions to these problems. So I think that we have a chance here that we should not waste, that it is very important to take and to bring forward.
Will the compact deal with the legitimate national concerns of security in these host countries?
Yes, I think the compact is like a new way of addressing this crisis, will be very much focused on the host countries and will very much look at what needs are generated for these countries by the presence of millions of refugees. As I said, we learned it in Syria. But look at a more recent crisis, the one of the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. Within a year of this phase of the crisis, very acute, we have almost 1 million people there, we have been able already to start mobilizing development resources, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, bilateral donors. This is new. In the past, we never had these interventions very early, so to speak, in a crisis. In Syria, we didn't. We waited 5, 6 years, you remember, till the London conference. So I think that there is a growing awareness that we need to move more quickly, not just humanitarian, but also longer term.
Does the compact deal with prevention?
Well, you know, prevention belongs more to, I believe, to the political domain. Prevention is prevention of conflict. But I think that if you deal properly with refugees flow, if, for example, you avoid what has happened in the beginning of the Syria crisis, having a whole generation of children deprived of education, if you provide education, this is prevention of future conflict. First of all, you give these children the hope and the capacity to go back to their country and reconstruct it. This is also prevention. President Museveni of Uganda always says this is an investment in the future of their country. And we have an interest, as the neighboring country, South Sudan is talking about, we have an interest in investing in education of these children so that in the future they go back and the country can be more peaceful.
You said the compact will be adopted by the General Assembly in December sometime, but there's also another compact on migration which is going to be adopted in Marrakesh at 11th of December. Are these two compacts interrelated? I suppose they are.
Of course they are. The migration compact deals more with people moving for economic or other reasons. These are not refugees. But it is important because the more you manage well migration, the less you will have people that move for economic reasons posing as refugees and somehow overburdening the refugee system. This has been at the origin of a lot of the current crisis of refugee protection.
How do they complete each other?
Well, I think that there are many issues on which we need to work together, and perhaps the most significant one is to combat this growing xenophobia and sentiment against foreigners, because it focuses not only on refugees but also on migrants, and it is wrong on both accounts.
Of course. What tangible difference will this compact make in the lives of the refugees and the communities that they live in?
I think for refugees the best example is education. If a child that has to live with his family, his country and his home doesn't have education, he can become a liability for himself and for the host societies and even for the larger international community. But the child that can go to school very quickly as soon as he becomes a refugee, this is a child that has a future. And I think this will make a big difference. And for host communities, imagine refugees come, sometimes have a big impact on the environment. If we can make sure that the refugees don't come and cut all the trees of a certain region because they have other sources of energy, this is also part of the compact, very much written into the compact, then we will have made a huge difference for that local community.
How can you build more confidence among the host countries to let refugees work, have property, for example, and to have more progressive policies towards refugees?
This is the most difficult issue because, of course, for countries that are often poor or middle income, the presence of large numbers of refugees from neighboring countries can be a source of preoccupation. So in order to convince them to work with them in hosting them, in keeping borders open, in giving them protection, they have to see that there is really a support of the international community. They cannot do this by themselves. And that support is support in terms of resources, financial resources, cooperation, partnership, but also resettlement, that other countries take at least some of these refugees and move them to their states. This is a difficult one, and unfortunately we have seen recently these resettlement figures decline and not increase. This is why we're not very happy about what's happening in countries like the United States. We would like this trend to be reversed. We have to express solidarity to
Did you give them that message? Did you give the administration?
We always give that message to all countries that reduce resettlement figures.
Yes. The World Bank, what role does it play within this compact?
The World Bank has been the primary development institution that has promoted this approach in education, in employment, in infrastructure. And the bank has never really dealt with refugees in the past, but in the past 3-4 years, they have become a very big player. And we've seen it in Africa in many countries. We're seeing now in Central America, in Bangladesh. They are playing a primary role, and other institutions are following the example of the World Bank, especially regional financial institutions.
We're living in a world where every 2 seconds we have a new refugees created. How does your organization keep up? And do you have the necessary funding to keep going?
Well, let me put it this way. Keep going is not an option. We have to keep going. That's that's what we're in the world for. Keeping up depends a lot on political support, but also on resources. No, we don't have sufficient resources. This is why I look at the compact also as a way to mobilize different type of resources to fill many of the gaps that have been created by a very inadequate or incomplete response to refugee crisis.
Can you mention to our viewers few of these new resources that you're thinking of?
Look, the World Bank, for example, under its so-called IDA-18 program, this is the main development program of the World Bank for poor countries, has established a $2 billion funds for countries hosting large numbers of refugees. This is for refugees and host communities and host states. 2 billion, you know, we would not be able to mobilize 2 billion with that ease. So this is very important. In Bangladesh, the bank established a $500 million fund to help Bangladesh respond to the Rohingya refugee crisis. So the Asian Development Bank, which is a regional financial institution, immediately followed suit and established a $200 million fund. So, you know, when we speak about the compact, it's very concrete. It can translate into very concrete measures.
I'm happy. Would you like to raise another point that I omitted, one or two, whatever?
I'll raise one more point.
Please go ahead.
And we should not forget a fundamental issue. Refugees flee from what? They flee from war, violence, persecution, instability. Now, to address this issue, the root causes of their movements, the responses are not enough, be they humanitarian or development. That's political responses that we need. And that's why year after year, as you know, I come back to the General Assembly to pass this message on behalf of the refugees. They are also watching what is happening here in New York and how the leaders are trying to solve conflicts. I've said it already. I don't think that this should be a parade of the powerful. This should be a place where leaders with determination, with humility, with conviction get together and try to resolve some of the conflicts that cause refugee flows.
Filippo Grandi, High Commissioner for Refugees, thank you so much for all the great work you do for the refugees around the world. And we thank you for this interview, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Best.
Thank you,
Thank
as
you.
usual.